Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. So excited to have you join us all this evening. My friend Brad Spangler, the missionary from Norway, is going to be joining us this evening. Brad and his wife, Anna Carolina, and their three children have been in Norway since 2015, doing just a mighty work over there. They're involved in quite a few different areas. Specifically, Brad is the head of Rhema Norway. Been doing that for a while, the campus director. Meanwhile, Anna has also been serving in the executive leadership team, which oversees the Rhema Bible Training College aspect of that. So these two have been doing an amazing job over there, building a school, building ministry, keeping family life and work life in balance as well. Brad is just an incredibly awesome guy. And I'm so excited to hear the wisdom for myself that you guys are going to be joining with me in a second. And just to share a really fast story about something that Brad did that impacted me personally. Not only is he an awesome dude, is he a missionary, but he is also the Rhema Prayer and Healing School usher, lead usher when I was in school in 2012 was the year. I also went on my very first ever missions trip in March of 2012 with Brad to the nation of Nigeria, and it made a mark on me. Not only did I get to see him in prayer and healing school, being a man of honor and integrity, challenging us to serve with the best and everything that we had in us and to honor the people that were in the pulpit, but also on this missions trip, I saw one of my very first major miracles through the hands of Brad. Jesus did an amazing work. We were at his church out in the kind of the middle of nowhere in Nigeria, and we were assigned the rowdy kids in the back of it. And the back of this church, there was actually no covering or anything. So we're out there and it's a little bit warm, and we kind of found this little overhang and had a spot to, talk to the kids about Jesus. My friend Whitney did a song, did like some rap and all that kind of stuff. It was funny to see and pretty cool. Brad also shared a little bit. And at the end of it, what happened was he started praying for the sick. And I had just turned 18 years old. I wasn't super familiar with everything, kind of getting my bearings and my feet under me, if you will. And they found this little blind boy. He was blind in both of his eyes. And I remember Brad saying to this guy, "We're going to pray and Jesus is going to heal you." And I was amazed by that. I went, wow, I want to see a miracle. I want to see a miracle for this kid. The little boy came forward. Brad and Whitney laid hands on him, began to pray. And tears filled the little boy's eyes because when he opened them, he could see. The power of God was all over him. And the kids around him were going crazy. I was going crazy. Brad and Whitney were going wild because this precious little boy had received healing and both of his eyes had been opened by the power of God and through faith in the name of Jesus. And immediately that just branded my heart. I was like, man, it's that easy. It's that simple. Brad can do it. Whitney can do it. I can do it too. So that encouraged me when I saw the impact that this had on this precious young man who got a call on his life, that he opened his eyes, he could see for the first time. And that was an amazing, amazing miracle because, again, it pushed me to begin to challenge myself of, you need to start doing this too. You have people around you. They may not all be blind, but some of them might be spiritually blind. They don't see Jesus. They don't know Jesus, and they might be sick with other things. I have to start seeing this kind of stuff too. So Brad not only was an example of what a godly man looks like and a godly leader looks like, but also how do we minister to the sick in faith? How do we minister the uncompromised word of truth? So I am so excited for all of you to hear from the heart of Brad tonight about missions work, about family, about life and ministry and whatever else we get into, and be encouraged. Just like Brad did it, just like I've been doing it, you guys have the same Holy Spirit, you have the same anointing. You might not be in Norway or any of the spots behind me as well, but you have a world that you can reach right around you at the same time. So my friends, let's get ready to hear from Brad Spangler. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited this evening to have a great man, great missionary, great leader. Like I said in the intro, someone that has been a part of my growth and development, actually, when I first moved to Rhema Bible Training Center at the time, now Rhema Bible College, back in 2011 and 12. And really excited to have Brad on tonight. I think you guys are going to get some great wisdom and understanding and also a different perspective. That's one reason that in this podcast, we have people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and also different areas of ministry as well, just so we can get different perspectives. The word says we all see in part, we all know in part. That's why I love having other people speaking into my life, because they have different life experience, have different areas to which God has called them to, that they can share their wisdom and insight. And for some of you listeners, I know we have missionaries that listen to this podcast. I believe you guys can grab some really great information and practical tips as well, moving into the things that God has called you to, and to even enhance the things that God has called you to in your prospective nation as well too. So Brad, just wanted to say again, thank you so much. And we had for being here. We had a great chat right before we went on and started recording as well. But thank you again for your time and being here to share some wisdom. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. We've already had some good times on different mission trips, and it was fun cutting it up before we started to record. It would have been nice to get some of that actually on the recording, but I think we'll have a great conversation anyways.
Yes, absolutely. We I actually shared a story in the intro about our first missions trip in 2012. Brad told me that was actually his first missions trips as well. And me, little young 18-year-old, just amazed at everything that was happening. I had no idea. I thought Brad had been doing it for years, and just this professional minister up there like Oral Roberts or somebody, just the sick being healed, preaching up a storm, going, he's so amazing. So
well, every time I have to see you, I have to apologize, because Josh actually had a front row seat to my first time ever preaching, and I know it wasn't any good. So if anything good came out of that meeting, it was totally God, and he gets
yeah, well, I mean, it's great for me and really cool to see, all kinds of, even when we're doing something for the very first time, when we're relying on the Holy Spirit, even if it's not clean, it's not perfect, Holy Spirit still moved, people got healed, and people were blessed. So it's cool to see how God makes up the difference for us whenever we're doing something and stepping out in faith. One thing I did kind of want to start in and kind of transition into stepping out in faith, shared that you guys have been, you and your wife Anna have been part of Rhema Norway since 2015. So I guess I kind of want to start at the beginning, just to share some info and story for people who might not know you. Some of the people that listen will be familiar with you right away. You go, oh, I know Brad. I went to school, graduated with him too. But I guess from the very beginning, was first of all, a couple different things. So first of all, how Norway? How did you end up going from the United States and marrying a Swedish girl, end up in Norway? And second of all, what was it actually like once you knew, all right, this is where God is leading us, and now we actually have to take the step to make it happen? Because there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes, where you're talking about visas, paperwork, getting, a flat or an apartment or whatever, getting languages involved, all that kinds of stuff as well. So I guess for me, how did this even start on the inside of, this is something you knew for years ahead of time, like, all right, I'm called to go to Norway, this specific spot with this specific girl, and we're gonna have all these things happening? Or what was that process like for you?
Yeah, I actually have a pretty fun story to just take you back. So I met my wife Anna in prayer school. So we all served together. Josh was
Yep.
there, you served with us in prayer school and Rhema Bible Training Center in Tulsa. And so actually, when we first met, it definitely wasn't love at first sight. She thought I was some dorky American, did not like the way I dress. Still thinks I'm dorky, but she's helped me with dressing and matching my clothes a little bit better. But I thought she was the ice queen. So that was my nickname for her my first year, Ice Queen. And
Oh man.
and so over time, we developed a good friendship and got to know each other. And then eventually, as we were graduating, really pursued a relationship. But she knew before she graduated that she was heading to Norway. Now, for some years, through my prayer time and through studying the Bible, I knew God was going to send me to the nations. Jeremiah chapter 1, where basically Jeremiah gets called by God and he says, I'm going to make you a prophet to the nations. That really jumped out. It leaped off the page at me. So I knew that I was called to missions. I didn't know what that looked like. And as you said, I took different opportunities, like going to Nigeria, places like Kenya, Haiti, different developing nations. And really that was my picture for some time of what it meant to be a missionary. So that's where I thought I was going. So when you ask the question, why Norway? Simply put, it was because of a girl. Actually, it goes deeper than that, but my thoughts were, hey, I'm going back to the continent of Africa, or I'm going, some other place, some other developing nation, because that's where real missionaries go. That was my perspective at the time. But as Anna and I got closer and closer, and we were dating and we were talking about marriage, I knew that I had a decision to make. So I remember going home on Thanksgiving. We had a break from Rhema during that time. And so I went home and I just decided to fast and pray and just say, God, I need your wisdom here. Because I think when you know that you're called on a specific path, one of the most important decisions you can make is who you get married to. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yep.
if your spouse is not in agreement with you about going to the mission field, that's a huge red flag. So Anna, I knew she was going to Norway. I had thoughts about going other places. So that was a kind of a red flag for me. So I just had to seek God and find out, okay, Lord, what's really your will for this relationship? And Norway has never been on the radar for me. And so I can say this, after the very first day on that fast, I was reading 1 Corinthians chapter 13, what we call the love chapter. It says, love is patient, love is kind, love, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud. And right when I read it's not proud, the Holy Spirit just spoke to my heart. He said, you are in pride about going to Norway, because my picture or my thought at that time was I had to lay down God's call for me to go to other places so I could follow my girlfriend at the time. She was going to be my wife, to Norway. And it was this kind of messed up perspective that I would just be following her like a puppy almost. And instantly, my whole mindset around Norway shifted. I actually got excited thinking about Norway, because I realized God, he said that he would send me to the nations. There was never a specific nation. I put my own interpretation
Right.
on what he spoke to my heart. I think so many times we do that, where God actually gives us a Rhema word for that season, a revelation, and we just immediately put our interpretation on it. And we start going out, we start working, we start making things happen. But many times we just have to slow down and say, okay, God, let me sit with this for a minute. Let me actually see, is this what you're saying to me? Let's slow down here and move at the pace of grace, really. And so that's what I was essentially doing at that moment. And the Lord just spoke to my heart on that first day. He said, continue it was a 3-day fast that I did. On the first day, I knew that that it was fine for me to pursue this relationship. I had a green light on the inside. I had peace. But he said, continue to fast, because the enemy is going to try and come in and steal that seed. In Mark chapter 4, it talks about the parable of the sower. He goes out and sows the seed, and immediately the enemy comes in to try and snatch that seed, snatch that revelation. And
Right.
so I did 3 days. I did that fast. And after that 3-day fast, I knew Anna and I were going to get married. And it was part of God's plan that our lives came together and we moved to Norway together. So that's a long way of just basically saying Norway wasn't on my radar, but going to the nations was. And I just had to really get before the Lord to get more specifics, because many times as we're following God's plan for our life, we'll get general big ideas, but the more steps we take closer to that, the more honed in the vision becomes. So I don't know if it's been that case for you, Josh, where God has spoken to you generally about some things, and as you take steps closer to it by faith, it starts to get more clear.
Well, definitely, there's been a couple of decisions that he's made or that I've made that he directed me into, where initially I'm kind of like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why exactly am I even like, this wasn't at all what I had in mind when we started walking on this path. Like you said, one of the biggest situations is when you're looking at God's plan for your life, the direction that he has, you don't want to be going one way and then the person you're in a relationship is like, yeah, I was supposed to be going this way instead. And you're like, no, we should probably be united and going the same direction, because I don't want to, hinder what the dreams and the things that God's put on her heart any more than she would want to do that for me. I met my wife Actually, it was my cousin's roommate, and we served in prayer and healing school together as well. And that's the story for quite a few of us that went there. We found our spouse in prayer and healing school, and when I actually went to school, I had no interest in going into any kind of missions work. I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. I thought there's no point to do it. I don't want it. It's too scary. It's a waste of time, money, resources, whatever. I had a really bad attitude about it. But then God began to deal with my heart, is like, you should go experience it and see what it's all about. Because just like there's people here in the US that need the gospel, there's a lot of people outside the US that need the gospel too. And it'll help give you some perspective. So when I went with you to Nigeria, I got to see like, whoa, there's a big world out here. And there's a lot of not just opportunities, but also God's heart is not just for one specific group or one specific people. He wants the entire world. That's what John 3:16 says, the first verse I ever memorized. For God so loved the entire world that he gave his son. It's not just about one particular people that speak a specific language. God wants everybody. His heart is for the entire world. He has a destiny for every single person, every single individual here on this planet. And I knew I was included in that. I just wasn't interested on that particular path. It's kind of one that I was like, yeah, bridges out there. I'm not interested. I'm not going down that path for my life. But then when I went to Nigeria, that first step that I took, because it wasn't me moving overseas for 20 years and establishing a church and doing all this kind of stuff. For me, it was just, I went on that short-term missions trip. We were there for like a week, 10 days, something like that, maybe. It wasn't super long.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think. But that really started something on the inside, just with the healing thing that I mentioned about you, but also my heart for the nations as well. And behind me on the map, that have seen the podcast before know that I've had this map behind me. The dots are the different places that I've gone, taught remotely, different things, and it does help keep perspective of what exactly am I doing. There's a big world out there. It's more than just this little area in front of me. I focus on that. But also, what about the rest of the world as well, too? Because there's people all over the place that need help, that need support, that need people connecting with them to help further the gospel. We're not supposed to be islands in and of ourselves out there struggling. We're called to be a body. The Bible says we are the body of Christ, not the bodies of Christ. We're called to be unified, working together and helping each other out. But I think you're exactly right on that. And taking the steps in faith that God shows you, whether you see it or not, and not boxing God in. I think that's one huge thing that you said there too, was it's easy to have our own perspective of, well, this little box right here, this is where, the call of God can fit, and this is where God's plans and ideas fit for me. And it's like, no, God's ideas are huge. He's got big ideas, got big plans, and knows how to set us up for his plan and for success as well. So I think that's really great. And yeah, that's a great way of actually like getting to the actual Norway thing is that area as well. One thing I was kind of curious about, and maybe you can like help share with some of our listeners about. So let's say, for instance, okay, so they have the plan just similar to you. They're working through it, and they're starting to realize like, okay, God is trying to expand and stretch me and push me into an area that I hadn't anticipated before, I thought was out of my wheelhouse. Was there any kind of like feeling of, oh, I'm a little nervous about doing this, I don't really know how do I go somewhere where I don't speak the language? Like, I know that in Norway they like I think they teach English in schools. Is that right?
They do. They get it
Okay.
at a young age. So right now, my kids, they're 7, 5, and 9 months old. And so my 7 and 5-year-old, they're fluent in Norwegian, fluent in English. Obviously they get English at home, but already in first, second grade, they're getting English at school. So, and then they get Swedish at home too. So they are actually at a young age getting to be trilingual. Where
that's awesome.
I still have some broken Norwegian. So they're not having the same struggle as their dad right now. That's for sure.
Well, that's such an awesome tool, honestly, to be able to give your kids is, from a young age, help them start learning things and making language less of a barrier for sure. Was there some issues like for you, I guess, and actually like stepping out and knowing how to do it, obviously God's not going to fail us. But at the same time, I think there can be nerves on, well, can I actually do this? What does this look like? How do I know where to go, or how do I start something? Because some people start from the ground up. Like they go to a place, there is nothing here. We have a completely clean slate. Some people go to take over something that was already established, or in some cases, something that's fallen apart that they're trying to rebuild. So I guess like the second question that I have for you is, what did that kind of look like for you as far as like internally, like the process of realizing like I'm committing to this, I'm gonna do this, we're gonna get there and actually go and do what God has called us to. And then what was it actually like transitioning in the natural to actually going to Norway and starting the work that God had called you to?
Mm-hmm. So to take the first question, once I knew that Anna and I we were going to get married, we're on the same path, working towards the same thing. There was never a doubt in my mind that we were going to Norway. So that there was that anchor. I knew
Yeah.
God had called us. And I would say before anybody steps out on the mission field, you have to know that you know that you know that you're called. You have to
Yeah.
have that anchor because it's not going to look the way you think it's going to look. When
Mhm.
you get over there, you can dream about it, you can talk about it, you can prepare all you want, but once you hit feet, your boots on the ground, it will just look different.
Yeah.
And there will be good days, there will be difficult days, and you're just going to have to know that you're in the
Mhm.
assignment that God has for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So we probably could have done things a lot better preparation wise. But I would say the one thing that we did really well is we would constantly talk about Norway. We dream about it
Mhm.
together. We let people know what we were doing. We probably could have been better even about sharing the vision and support raising before we left, but we were just young and inexperienced, and we just knew we were going right.
Mhm.
Another thing that we did, so after we got married, or when we were doing our premarital counseling, we were talking to different people who were in ministry for a long time, and they encouraged us to get married, but at least take 1 year just to be married. Just get to know each other. Don't move to the mission field right away, because sometimes when we get that call and we get clarity on that call, at least my personality, I just want to go 0 to 100 like that. And we think Jesus is coming back tomorrow. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. We have to
Right.
go right away. But usually we have time and there's wisdom and there's things we should learn and prepare for. And so Anna and I, once we got married, we waited exactly 1 year to the day. And on our 1 year wedding anniversary, we were walking through the Oslo airport having moved to
Wow.
Norway.
Okay.
So I would say we got some advice from different mentors. We actually listened to that advice, even though we wanted to leave much sooner. So again, just being in agreement with your spouse, talking to people who have experience, that can save you a lot of trouble and a
Mhm.
lot of heartache getting there. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's something I've learned.
Yeah.
Go find people who are doing what you want to do already in that specific region of the world and go talk to them.
Mhm.
Like, they're going to save you so much time and trouble. Maybe later I can tell you about the $5,000 mistake that I made having moved here.
Oh
Like I
no.
said, I haven't done things perfectly, but we haven't given up and we've just stayed with the call. Now, the one thing we did have going for us is we did not, when we first moved here, the work was already going. So we were not
Yeah.
starting from scratch. So we were joining a team. That said, at the time, there was some dysfunction in the team, so things definitely did not look the way we thought it would. And within about a year to a year and a half time, some different things kind of blew up within the leadership, and we had to deal with a lot of heartache and pain. But to just go back for a second, I would say, when somebody moves there, it's just going to take, when you move to a different country, it's going to take time to get set up and established. Don't be too hard on yourself. If you're a very regimented person, you're used to your routines, you can't get too rigid. Even getting a bank account here, it took a long time. I had to
Mhm.
go out and actually find a job before I could get a specific bank account.
Mhm.
And before you can get a job, many times you have to at least understand the language or speak
Mhm.
some of the language. So it just takes a long time when you're moving to a different country to get established. So just be patient, have grace with yourself, have grace with your spouse. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in the
Yeah.
preparation side of it, but I would just say there's no one way to prepare, but definitely with the language, if you're moving somewhere, I did not do this well. But if you are moving to a different culture, learning the language as fast as you can will be a big, big help to understand the culture, you need to understand the language. And that has been a hindrance to me at different
Yeah.
times. Now I understand much better. I'm speaking more fluently, but I still have a long way to go there. But I have other missionary friends who they've completely dove in, learned the language, and it's opened up more opportunities for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's an important thing as well too, is just to be patient, like you said, and God doesn't get stressed out about things. That's one huge thing. Is it's easy for people, I think, just to immediately just chomp and go, all right, right now, right now, right now, right now. It's like, okay, but first of all, like, there is some preparation, there is some groundwork that goes in ahead of time, and I think what you were talking about too is having that anchor settled ahead of time. Is this is where we know that God has called us to. That's a huge thing, because we both know people, I'm sure, that have got the stars in their eyes, and I'm called to the nations, I'm called to go here, I'm called to go there. Oh, okay, well, have you ever been there before? Like, well, no, stop, stop killing my dreams. Like, I'm not trying to kill your dream, I'm just asking, like, have you ever tried learning some of the language? Do you know anyone in that place? Like, do you have
history,
ways of actually exactly, like, do you know anything about it? Have you actually gone there to check, like, on the inside, and get a green light on, yeah, this is absolutely where I'm supposed to go, need to confirm this? And sometimes people know, and they just launch out, immediately burn up, and they're back home, and you're like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
wish you would have taken a little slower and just been checking that on the inside, pray through some of this stuff. One of my
yes.
friends actually was feeling about going to Mongolia, and Mongolia is like, that's not a place I hear about too many people going. And I'm like, I don't think I know anybody that's in Mongolia. That's interesting, and I recommended you talk to the missions director here at the school, Reverend Joe Dunnick. And he was like, yeah, I should probably do that. And I was like, I think if you find, like, get to know some people, maybe there's Rhema grads over there, find somebody, like, even not Rhema grads, but I would encourage you, like, just get to know somebody that's over there. So you have a place to land, or at least have someone at the airport that you can meet up with and just help you kind of navigate the spot too. So what was cool about that is he actually ended up going over there for about a week. He met like 8 different pastors that had him come and minister at his churches in different places, and built a whole lot of relationship. And this is just in the span of a week, where like he did a little bit of groundwork ahead of time, got to make a bunch of great connections, got to see it, and then he came back and he was like, yeah, like, this definitely seems right. The grace of God is on this. And he said, like, I got a plan. We're gonna do, his wife is actually in school right now, going to Rhema second year. And he said, after my wife graduates, I'm gonna get some stuff prepared ahead of time. We're gonna get some money in order, get our kids prepared, and then we're gonna probably land in Ulaanbaatar next year at some point. And I think that's awesome, because you're getting some of the preparation work done ahead of time, and not just wasting a bunch of energy and stuff going somewhere, and trying to plant yourself somewhere that you don't actually know is where God is calling you long term.
Yeah.
And you
And
remember as well. Oh, go ahead.
you said something really good there too. Like, even with your friend going to Mongolia, what he's doing, sometimes in our excitement, we can come across overzealous, and we're not always respecting the work that's already going on. So one thing that I always encourage missionaries, whether you're going to join a work or start and pioneer new work, when you go in, you have to go in with humility. You are not the hero of the story. Of course, Jesus is the hero, but there's other people who have been plowing that ground for years, for decades, for centuries, potentially, and you are standing on the shoulders of giants when you go there. So you have to go in and find out about what work is already happening in this place. I need to connect with those people. I need to find out about them, find out about their story. What has God placed on their heart? How can I add value to what they're already doing? And that's going to take time. So it's amazing to hear that your friend went in and was able to meet with 8 pastors within a week.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And
Yep.
so one thing he'll have to do is just continue to move at the speed of relationship. That's another thing. So you go in with humility, you find out about the churches and the pastors and their visions, but you have to move at the speed of relationship, because without those connections and without those people there to help you, you're not going to be able to go very far. So that's one
Yeah.
thing that I tell my team here, is that Rhema Norway, we have a piece of the puzzle. What we're doing is not the whole picture.
Yep.
God has a lot of people in the Nordic nations doing amazing things, and all together we make this big puzzle, this picture. but we have one puzzle piece. That one puzzle piece is extremely important, but we can't be oblivious to what's already going on around us. And we need to hook up with people and come and be a blessing to them. It's not just about us and our vision. So I
Yeah.
think that's so good that he is moving slow, using wisdom, preparing himself, but connecting with people who are already doing work there.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too, is when you're talking about moving at the speed of relationship, God knows. One thing that Reverend Joe would always used to say in mission school is he would say, God knows who you know and who you should know by now, like who you know right now and who you should know by right now. And that's one of my one of those quotes that rolls around in the back of my head. I can hear him even saying it in his own, his own like northerner accent. God knows who you should know, and like all the way he says it too. But I think it's God. God can set some of these things up ahead of time too. And like I said, God's not stressed out about it. And when we're following in the plan of God, there are intersections of destiny, if you want to call it that, or times where we come across the path at the right place, at the right time, with the right people, where God knows these two people are going to have an intersection right here. They're going to meet up, and then there is going to be something that happens where they can have the connection, they can have mutual growth that happens here and help each other in the call. Again, because we're either building the kingdom of God or we're trying to build our own castle. We can be castle-minded Christians, which is me and my own castle. I want to do my thing. I want to do it my way. Build this. But that's such a narrow-minded way of doing it. I don't want to just build my castle. I want to build the kingdom, because the word says, when I seek first the kingdom, all the things I need are taken care of. So I have to be a kingdom-minded person rather than just a castle-minded person. And one great example of this is, just for his own sake, lives in, let's just say, a more closed nation, and you probably know this particular guy, but he had a group of young, fiery social media people come into his nation, and let's just say they messed up on a few different things. They ended up going to a local holy site, desecrating it, and putting it on social media, and
Oh,
with their Bibles, with all their other different stuff too. And we're going, oh no, what are they doing? Because immediately they got in there, they actually got chased out of the nation. Like they had to get a plane flight out and get out of there,
yeah.
so that they didn't get in trouble or possibly injured, because of how mad the people were that they went there and desecrated this ancient holy site. And not only does it affect them negatively because they have to leave, but the missionary was sharing with me, he's like, everything is just way harder for me now, because they assume that we're all part of the same team, that we're connected, that maybe I had something to do with what they were doing, or we're part of the same organization. And he's like, I've been here for years, and these guys come in, they do their thing, they're not thinking about the consequences or anything else, they don't know anything about this place, and they go to this spot which is extremely holy to the people that live here, that we're trying to get the gospel to, and immediately just set us back because they wanted a photo shoot, because they wanted to put something on social media. And he's like, this makes it way harder for us. And I'm like, that's a good example, I think, too, of having to be careful what you're doing, making sure you're prepared ahead of time, and also following the leading of the Holy Spirit. Brad, you and I, we were taught that by Miss Leanne in prayer and healing school. We heard John 14:17 probably more times than a million times. Him. It's one of those things I hear in my head as well. But there's no getting around how important it is, because again, if the Holy Spirit had been consulted before that, and people could have avoided making mistakes, because not everything that happens to us is a result of us making bad decisions. There are times where other people make bad decisions. We have to clean up messes that other people have made, and just kind of handling that can get a little messy sometimes. And you shared briefly about that at the beginning, and again, as don't want to get into too much of the messy details or whatever, as far as you're comfortable with, but you shared about some things that happened when you first moved in, and I kind of wanted you to dive in as much as you'd like to on that. What does it look like when you're transitioning from the place that you grew up in, that into a foreign spot, and you come alongside and help other people with the work, and then there's kind of an implosion that happened. You have to pick up the pieces a little bit, because I liked what you said about coming in with humility and realizing, I don't know everything about everything, and it's not my job to come in here and teach every single person that's in leadership above me, no, you're doing missions wrong, this is the way you really do missions. Obviously we need to learn some things, we have a part to bring, but I don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to sit everybody down and, learn them something good. But what was that actual process like for you, kind of moving into that, seeing that happen, and then kind of picking up the pieces?
I mean, that's such a good question. So to give you context about Norway, Norway is about 5 million people in the nation. And the Christian community obviously is a lot smaller
Yeah.
than that. So when we first moved here, I mean, Rhema was really exploding. People were very excited. We had to give you context. We had over 70 people in our first class that we were
Wow.
holding. And for a European campus, Bible school campus, that's extremely large. Normally you might get 20, 30, 40 would be a big class, but we had over 70 people. And when we first moved in there, we realized pretty quickly that the infrastructure was not set up to hold that many people. And that's one thing that I really learned very quickly with leadership and developing teams and developing systems. Yes, we want to be led by the Holy Spirit. We want to be flexible, but we have to have processes to undergird the work that God's called us to do. So we started noticing different cracks in the processes, and students started leaving and dropping out. And before too long, we started hearing different rumors and people talk about some things in the leadership that was going on. And
Right.
initially, we didn't really think too much of it just because we really trusted these people. Well, to make a really long story short, these people were making promises to different pastors and Bible school students that they just couldn't keep.
Okay.
And they burned a lot of bridges. They made a lot of bad decisions.
Right.
And so in a small country like Norway, people talk.
Mm.
And so the only picture that I can have that can really adequately describe it is we felt like we walked into a room with a ticking time bomb. And within 18 months, that ticking time bomb went off and everything was just on fire.
Yeah.
We had a campus on the east, that 70 students that we had eventually dwindled down to about 20 who finished. So we lost about 50 students from that class. And the West Coast, where we live now, kind of blew up because of just poor choices from the leadership. That leadership is no longer with us. They haven't been with us for some years, about 5 years now. But we really walked into a mess. And so for about 5 years, we've been really rebuilding that infrastructure. We have been cleaning up that mess. But initially, when all of those fires were going on, we even had Christian newspapers writing about it. They were
Oh no.
very anti Kenneth Hagin. So they were actually
Yeah.
telling people to burn Kenneth Hagin books. They thought he was a
Oh my
heretic.
goodness.
It was very crazy. It was very crazy. But you know what? When I look back, as bad as that time was, it really actually bonded the rest of the team. The rest of the team came together even closer. It made us even stronger internally. And we were ready to roll up our sleeves and do the work because we all knew that God had called us to work with Rhema Norway. We knew Rhema was here for a purpose, to bring the message of faith into the Nordic nations. That didn't change just because some people made bad decisions. So it
Right.
brought us
Right.
closer as a team. It
Right.
united us around the vision, but there was a lot of work to be done. The toughest part for me through that whole process was not the initial explosion. The toughest part for me was about 5 years of doing a lot of hard work, putting in blood, sweat, and tears, and seeing very little external results. All the time, Josh, I had thoughts of doubt, like, what are we doing here? Is this really making a difference? We had a couple failed launches when we were trying to launch some different campuses. We didn't have enough students joining. We actually went through a period during COVID when we had almost 18 months to 2 years of no students. Here we are working with Bible schools as missionaries. We don't even have any students for almost 2 years. What am I supposed to tell people back home? That
Right.
was extremely difficult. So there were some certain things that we can maybe touch on that really help kind of guide me through that time. But I would just say to anybody coming into a new nation, humility is such a key. Move at the speed of relationship, but then also follow through with your word. right? That is so, so key, because like you said before, you might be doing some things unintentionally, or you might be making certain promises that you can't keep. Not only is that hurting your relationship with those people, but you're actually hurting other missionaries who are there doing work, because they don't separate, oh, this is a Baptist, or this is a Lutheran, or this is a Pentecostal. No, this is just a Christian, right? That's the way they see it. And so they're going to label every Christian like that, or
Yeah,
every missionary like that. So you're going to make a lot
exactly.
of problems in a lot of ways for other people as well. So, so yeah, so that was a difficult time to walk into, but there were some good things that came out of it. And like I said, I could go more in detail about some of the things that kind of brought myself and my wife through that difficult time. But we'll go wherever you want to, Josh.
So, Brad, one thing I wanted to touch on next with you was regarding kind of like a work life, ministry life, and family ministry, you know, all the different kind of like spaghetti mess that we can have here going together. Because one thing I mentioned in the intro about you and Anna is you guys wear a lot of hats. You guys have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of pots on the stove, as they say, and just quite a few plates spinning. You know, all different kinds of
Mhm.
stuff happening at the same time. On top of being a husband, on top of being a father, you've got the school. You had to kind of like rebuild some things that were on fire, and all the while having children, having a wife. You know that you have with you over there, as well as just doing the things that people don't normally think about or talk about too often, because you don't really hear people go, "Oh yeah, like our apartment just like lost power for like 6 days. We had no heat, we had no warmth in the middle of the winter or whatever, and lost all of our food or whatever kind of natural things happen there too." But what's some wisdom that you can share for people that are, and again, like not just for, because I think this will apply regardless of where you live or what situation where you're in. Um, or how did you, like on the positive and negative, I guess, did you discover that there were some issues kind of trying to balance being a father, being a husband, being a leader, rebuilding stuff, and then trying to launch things all at the same time? Because I can't imagine trying to do all of that at once. Like that's a multitasking to a whole different level. What was that like?
Yeah. I mean, as you say that, I remember a time during that process where, like you said, we're trying to rebuild the ministry, rebuild Rhema's name here in Norway. I'm also working a full-time job in a factory. I felt like Paul building tents, except we were making trailers,
Oh
uh,
no.
which you might have mentioned this in the intro, but we do live on an actual island in Northern Europe. And so you can really feel like you're metaphorically and, naturally speaking on an island at times, working in a factory full time. Everything we did ministry wise was night and weekends. We'd be dragging our kids to meetings, and they'd be falling asleep in the kids' room and all kinds of stuff. I was actually working at one point two different jobs. I was working for the gym, working for the factory, working weekends. And I just got to a point where I really realized, like, okay, we have no boundaries here. We had said yes to way too much. And there's one thing I know, is that God has not called me to sacrifice my family on the altar of ministry.
Yeah, that's good.
And that is something that I always keep with me. I always try and keep in front of me, because family is so important. Who cares if we have thousands of students, we lead hundreds or thousands of people to faith in Jesus Christ, or whatever other kind of exploits we're trying to do in God's name, if we lose our family, if we lose our
Yep.
marriage, if our kids grow up and hate the church, they're not serving God, like, to me, that's a failure. So what I had to do is really just get honest with myself that I had said yes to too much. And I had to really ask myself, what is the core mission here? And so my wife and I started going through this process where we actually started doing kind of like a life planning process. We started talking about what our actual priorities were, core values in our family. We started getting to a point to where we wanted to include our children as they were getting older into the mission. I think that's one thing that you can do, whether you're on the mission field or whether you're not. I believe every follower of Jesus is on a mission. We're all part of the Great Commission, whether it's in your homeland or in a different land. So your kids, you need to see them as part of that mission. They're not an obstacle. They are not a hindrance. Of course, there's certain limitations there, God-given limitations when you have kids, but that can be a good thing, right? And there's different seasons in raising kids. So one thing that we try and do is just include our kids within that mission. So, I mean, one very practical thing that we do is we have a family meeting every single week where we sit down, we talk about why we're in Norway. So our mission as a family is to inspire other people to follow Jesus and help them to fulfill their God-given potential. One of the ways we do that is through establishing Bible schools, doing leadership training, helping church planters, getting the message of faith out into the Nordic countries. That's one way that we live that out. And so we talk with our kids about why we're here in Norway, why we do what we do, why we have different meetings. We go through a weekly preview, our schedules, and we just include them. If there's a big decision we have coming up, we make it age appropriate, but we talk with our kids about it. We let them have some input. I mean, ultimately, it's my wife and I who make the final decision, but we still make them part of the process. So they feel like they have skin in the game. They have ownership over this. And again, my kids are still pretty young. I don't know how much they're really getting it, but I do know that they look forward to having the family meeting. They know why we're here in Norway. They know what our core values are as a family. So that's one thing, just being kind of intentional about who you are as a family. What kind of culture are you building as a family? Because that's another thing too. When you're raising kids on the mission field, there's a term called third culture kids. So my kids were born in Norway, but they have US and Swedish citizenship. So they're not actually Norwegian legally. So I'm from the US. My wife was born in Tulsa, City of Faith, but actually grew up in Sweden. Her mom's Swedish, her dad's American. And so you have Swedish culture, you have Norwegian culture, you have American culture, all running through our household. And we have to really make sure that they know that we have our, what's our family culture? We have to be intentional about establishing that, because with third culture kids, they don't really feel like they're at home, maybe in Norway, because they're not actually Norwegian, even though they were born here, or their parents aren't Norwegian. So there's a lot of Norwegian customs and culture things that they miss at home. They don't actually feel at home in the US. That when we go back to the US, we're visiting grandma and grandpa, we're visiting other relatives, but that's just a trip. That's just a visit to them. That's not home. So we have to be very, very intentional with making sure that they feel like they're a part of the mission, but then also establishing, okay, what kind of culture do we want to have as a family? And how do you frame that too? Because we can frame it as, well, you guys really don't fit in here, here, here. Or we can frame it in as, we can take the best of American culture, what we view as the best of American culture. We can take the best of Swedish culture, Norwegian culture, and we can kind of make our own culture with that and frame it that way. I remember one time I was changing a car, my car tires. So in Norway, we have summer tires and winter tires, and there's a certain date that we have to change it in. That's about the only thing I can do on a car is change a tire. And I remember I was out there working on it. My hands were dirty at the end. My son came up. He goes, "Dad, what happened? Why are your hands so dirty?" I was like, "Oh, I was changing our summer tires and putting on the winter tires." He goes, he says in Norwegian, they go, "Ikke bra." So that means that's not good. And it hit me at that moment. I was like, man, you are so Norwegian. And that's not a bad thing, but I mean, there's a lot of things that his way of thinking is different than my thinking. And how do I relate to him that way? And so I would just say intentionality about who you are as a family. What's your family culture? What's your core values? Are you making your kids a part of the mission? Even if you live in the US, even if you're not quote unquote a missionary, you're still on a mission. Do your kids know why you do what you do? Another thing that was super helpful was there was a moment where I was walking to one of my kids' ultrasound. And in Bergen, For those of you who don't know, that's where you have the mountains, you have the fjords. When you think of beautiful Norway, Bergen is definitely what you would think about on a postcard. It's beautiful. So where I parked the car, there's a bunch of mountains around there. There's water. There was a little valley, and there was a cemetery that I was walking by. And it just hit me as I was walking to the ultrasound. Here I am walking past the cemetery, beautiful cemetery. The flowers were in full bloom. And I thought to myself, wow, the people in these graves, they've lived their life. And now they've returned to the dust. James, the Apostle James said, life is but a vapor. And here I am on my way to the ultrasound to see a picture of my yet to be born child. Mm-hmm. Now, I turned 38 this year. The average life expectancy for a male living in Western or Central Europe is about 79 years. Now, maybe I'll live longer than that, maybe not, but I'm somewhere in between. And I realized, wow, I have to be more intentional about what I focus my time on, what is moving the needle further on the mission that I say I'm at. Am I living my life with intention around what I say is important? If I say family is the most important thing, does my time reflect that? Does my schedule reflect that? Now, obviously, again, there's different seasons where you might have to put more like you're in a season, you have 5 kids, small kids. There's a lot of family time there, but there might come a time as they grow up and they're older, you have more time to put into ministry stuff. So there's definitely different seasons to it. But what I took away from that was I have to live my life with the end in mind. And so one practical exercise that I do is I actually write out my own eulogy. And so there's 3 questions that I ask myself when I wrote this out. And the first question is, what do I want the people who are closest to me to say about me when I'm gone? That's my wife, that's my kids. What do I want them to say about me? The second thing is basically, who do I actually want to become? And then the third one is, what kind of impact do I want to make in my community and the world at large? And so as I started writing these different things down, I realized that there was a gap in what I had written down, and then how I was actually living my life. And so I had to start cutting things away to make my life line up more with what I said was actually important. And so over time, I had to make certain decisions, even though they might have been good things, to say, I can't do this anymore. The word no became a complete sentence for me, meaning that when somebody asked me to do something, no was enough. I didn't have to give an explanation. I feel like some of your viewers might struggle with saying no, because we have a heart to serve. We have a heart to help people, but we can take on too much and spread ourselves thin, and we end up being no good at home. We're not giving our best at work. We're not giving our best in the ministry. And so it's very, very important that you learn how to set up certain boundaries and stay within those boundaries, just have a certain vision in mind about your life, and just revisit that over and over again. So actually every year I go back to that eulogy and I update it, because I'm seeing more different things become important to me. I update it every year. I look at it every week and say, okay, how am I living right now compared to what's written down? So those are just some of the things that we've done around our family to make sure that our kids are secure in who they are as missionary kids, and just make sure that we are actually honoring God with the way that we handle our family and life and ministry. So.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there. Those are some profound thoughts, actually. Like I almost kind of like want to look back on some of that and ask myself, man, how intentional are you being, Josh? Like you could learn some things from Brad there. There's a lot to go through and digest there. And I definitely going to listen back to that part for sure and kind of pick some parts, because I think that is such a good discipline, I think, really is what that is, because I think it's really easy just to kind of get stuck on the thing that you have been doing, or like this is just what I do. I've always done this. I'm going to continue to do this, whether it's doing anything or not, and whether or not, because there are times I think where God calls you to do specific things, and then all right, you might need to move into something a little bit different, and then you might need to move into something a little different, and sometimes that's so somebody else can move in there and take that place. I know when
Sure.
God began to deal with us about moving from Michigan back to Oklahoma to go to mission school, and this is I've been in ministry for 7, 8 years at the point, and working in local churches, doing all different kinds of stuff. And God deals with me. You need to move back to Oklahoma in the middle of 2020 with all the stuff that's happening, and go back to mission school. And I go, what? No, 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 no. No, this is what we've been doing. This is what we're going to continue to do. I'm like, axe, like nose to the grindstone, like, axe to the tree, plow on the ground. We're going to keep on going and full steam ahead. And God goes, nope, it's time to switch to something different. And
Yeah.
part of that, I think, is to help with the plan that God has called us to do. Other people can move into the spots that I was holding, and to give them some more experience and give them more practical training in the things that God has called them to do there. And then for me, I got to go make some great connections and launch into something totally different and something new. So again, like as an encouragement to the listeners as well, being intentional and always coming back to it, because I liked what you said there at the end. Like, it's not just something that you wrote down once, you forgot about, just throw it out of your mind, okay, that part's done, but you're going back to it constantly, going, okay, and checking up on yourself, like, how am I doing, how am I updating on this thing? Are there some things that need to go, some things that need to be trimmed off? They might not necessarily even be bad things,
Well,
and
most of the
saying
time they're
no.
not.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of the time they're
Exactly.
not. So the biggest enemy to the plan of God for your life is sometimes good things.
Oh,
It
that's
just
good.
looks
Yep.
good. It's going
I
back
like
to the
that.
garden. It's the tree, the knowledge
Yeah.
of good and evil. It's what's good in our own eyes, but is it really what
Right,
God's
right,
telling you to do in that season? Because
right.
so often we make commitments and we, like you said, it's just what I do. I said yes 10 years ago. I'm still doing this, but have you checked in with God and said, hey, is this what I'm still supposed to be doing in this season?
Right,
Because
right.
if we don't move, like you said, we're not letting other people come up and grow and develop after us. And
Mhm.
that's one thing that we work with for pastors all the time. The biggest hindrance to a church's growth, many, many times, is the pastor is doing too much. They're
Yeah.
not empowering and equipping their people to step up and help carry that load to
Yeah.
where they can focus on the most important thing, not just a good thing, but the best
Mm.
thing for what they're called to do.
Right, right. Yeah, that's another great point there as well too. Yeah, the ability to kind of like let some things go, delegate a little bit. I know in the positions that I've held, that can be a nerve-wracking thing, especially if you're a perfectionist of like, oh, well, the way that I do it's the right way. I've seen things before though that I've released to other people, and they have a totally different angle. It's way more efficient. It's way more clear. It's way better. And I go, if I wouldn't have let go of that particular thing and let that person actually do what they're gifted at, and begin to have some skill expression in that, if you want to call it that, like, man, it's way quicker, and I don't have to be carrying something that I am doing less effectively than someone else could be doing. Because like you said, whether it's experience or helping people grow, or trusting the team around you to actually be able to do some things and not have to be a control freak about it and going, well, if it's not me doing it, it's not being done right. Because that's a really tricky thing when it comes to leadership, I think, is letting go of the reins sometimes and saying, all right, you drive for a second, you gain some experience. And we both have had people do that in our lives, Brad. I know where
Oh,
pastors have let
yeah.
me be involved. I've been on church boards and gotten to see behind the curtain a little bit of, there's a lot of things that are required to running an organization. There are these budgets that you have to look at. There are staffing things you have to look at. Like, what does it look like to actually have these different departments that you're overseeing? If there's 5 or 6 different things, you have the missions department, you have the social media, you have people care, doing hospital visitation, youth group at children's, and young adults ministry, and all this kind of stuff that's happening. And when you get a bigger look at it, you go, there's no way that one person can run this alone. And I think back of the story of Moses, to where his father-in-law comes to him and says, you're burning yourself out because everybody has to go to you. So
Yeah.
delegate, let other people, be able to learn and grow, and to have some say in this, to take the load off of you. And That is one thing I appreciate, and one reason that all of you guys that are listening, you should follow Spangler Ministries, because Brad has these really awesome and profound blog posts that he puts out there, and I know I get excited every time he uploads one. I'm kind of like reading through it, going, all right, like what can I learn from this? What can I see from this? And there's been so many times where I'm reading through it, and he says something, and I go, okay, this is exactly what I needed for today. Like it's similar to like the releasing things you've been doing for a while. I know that really spoke to me, and God began to deal with my heart and gave me some answers on some things because I was looking to other people and some of the wisdom and advice that they had as well. And one area of expertise I would say that I've seen Brad really flow in is in teaching leadership and walking in leadership and sharing on some like deeply profound ideas, but breaking them down into such a way where it's actually manageable and you can actually get bite-sized pieces of it. So I want to encourage all of you guys, if you're not following Spangler Ministries, go ahead and do yourself a favor and do that, because get some good nuggets out of it for sure too. In that particular way, talking about growth, talking about leadership, and even in yourself, personal growth, family, all that kind of things. What has been one of the, let me frame the question like this, I guess. So for you personally, in family and also ministry, what have been some of the most rewarding things that you have seen or experienced since following the call of God in your life?
Wow. That's a really good
Throw,
question.
throw your curveball.
Yeah. Yeah. You went a different way than I was expecting, but I like the question. Some of the most profound things. Well, I mean, number one, like if you were to ask my wife and myself, if we could pick anything in life that we could do and money just wasn't an issue, we would still be doing the exact same thing
Wow,
that we're doing right now.
that's
So
awesome.
the contentment and the feeling of knowing that you're exactly in the will of God for your life, you're on assignment, you're on mission with the person that you love,
Yeah.
is just amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But then, I mean, I've had, by the grace of God, I've had opportunities to travel different places in the world. Like I was somebody growing up that I never had the intention of leaving my hometown. The fact that I'm teaching in Bible schools now, that never crossed my radar growing up. I was afraid of public speaking. I remember when I sensed God called me to preach and I argued with him, I thought, Lord, you got the wrong guy, because I'm afraid of public speaking. I was the kid in
Right.
class that I faked being sick so I didn't have to get up and give my school presentation.
Oh no.
So, but this is what he told me. He said, you're going to preach and you're going to know that it's actually me working in you because you know how you were before. I
Right.
believe there's a spiritual gifting. There's like, I know the opportunities I've had to go different places and preach the gospel or teach in different Bible schools. It's purely by the grace of God. It's
Yeah.
the anointing for the assignment. And I am well aware of that. So, I mean, God has surprised me with so many different opportunities where I almost have to pinch myself and say, wow, am I really here right now? Am I really doing this? Um, as far as family goes, I mean, we try and do like these quarterly, like every quarter, we try and do these family adventures. So I mean, our kids, we travel quite a bit. My 9-month-old, she's been on like 13 planes already.
Oh
8
wow.
months old. So
Wow.
that was one thing that people, when we had started having kids, they're like, oh yeah, now you can't travel as much. Now things are going to change. But we just said, forget that. They're
Yep.
on mission with us.
Yeah.
And we just started traveling. So our kids, we'll take them to Sweden during the summertime. They've been to Spain with us. We go back to different places in the US. We've experienced some of the most beautiful places in the world
Wow.
with as a
Yeah.
family. And so it's not just all about the work. Yes, the work is important, the mission is important, but you have to enjoy life too. If you're going to do missions for the long haul, if you're going to make it in ministry, you have to have fun. That was actually one thing that a mentor said to me. When I started really taking personal growth seriously and self-leadership very seriously, I sent him my personal growth plan. He said, you know what, Brad, this looks pretty good. But one thing I added to my growth plan years ago was fun.
Mm.
You need to have fun. You need to enjoy the ride. You need to enjoy the process. I can be the type of person where I'm very achievement oriented. I think I'll
Right.
have fun when we do this. And so I'll wait to have fun. So I actually have to schedule in my life. No, we're going to have fun. No, we're going to take this trip. I have to be, again, intentional about that to do it with my family, or I'm just not going to do it. That's just how it is. Some people are very, very spontaneous. That's their personality. That's not me. I have to schedule it in. I have to process it a bit. But those experiences are priceless because, again, looking back when I was a teenager, I had no thought or inclination of leaving my hometown. And now, looking at what I get to do, it blows my mind. So those are
I love
just
that.
a few of the things that following the plan of God has just opened my eyes to so many new things. It's blown the lid off of what I think is possible.
Hmm.
And now I truly believe all things are possible for those who believe. And if you
Hmm.
follow Jesus, it's not boring. It's not the legalistic lifestyle, but it's truly a joy to get to be on mission with him, connect with other people, and you're just hanging on for the ride.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, exactly. I think perspective is such a huge thing. I remember. I know our time is kind of winding down here. Want to be sensitive to that because I know you got stuff going on over there too. Uh, I remember this was when I was in Michigan. I remember I was really unhappy with the season of my life, the things that were going on. I was working at a factory, just not loving any of it. Really unhappy. There had been a few different things, like personally, that had been going on that were just kind of difficult, like blows to family and all kinds of different stuff that had happened. And I was driving home, and I worked probably 3.5, 4 miles from my home. I traveled very, very short distance. I was driving home in my car, and it's a straight shot. You take one turn, and you're at the house. And there's a little back road that you can go, but it's super annoying. You're just constantly taking turns and stuff. And it was the fall time, and God told me, He said, take a left here and go the long way. I want to go the long way home. I want to get home. I had a horrible day at work. I'm feeling mad and feeling sorry for myself right now because I'm just so upset, like playing the world's smallest violin, feeling bad for myself.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing it right the last second, hit the brakes really hard, swung over and took the back way around. And I was driving, just focused on this. And God told me, He said, look around. So I looked around. There's trees, oranges, greens, yellows, all different kinds of stuff. I'm going, yeah, it's just trees. It's just trees, God, just like every other tree. It's just like, and just having a bad attitude. And I remember that God, because I was just so focused on getting home. And then God spoke to my heart, and He said, you know, Joshua, He said, if you try to rush through the season of life that you're in, you're going to miss the beauty in that season.
Oh, come on.
And that really like hit like a hammer, like on the inside of me too, because I realized I'm so focused on trying to get where I think I want to be or where I think I need to be or getting out of wherever, like whatever season and assignment that God has me in. Cause like, well, I'm not satisfied, but once I get to the next thing, I'll get satisfied. And then I get to that next thing. Well, I don't really like this either. Once I get to the next thing, I'll be satisfied. Okay, no, not this one. I know it's going to be the next one, Brad. I know it's not this one, and it hasn't been any of the last four. I'm going to be satisfied when I get to that next one. And then I get to that, and it's rushed through this as fast as I possibly can. But
Mhm.
that's something that I think about quite often is just being at a place of peace and enjoying the season of life that you're in. Again, not that there's not things that we can grow in, we can have personal growth and development and do some things better. But I really like what you shared there too, because I think for some people, the idea is like, okay, well, where I am is making me miserable. It's like, well, the truth is, there's people miserable all over the world. Like you can be in the nicest, the nicest island somewhere, sipping on ice cold water on the beach, and you can be miserable there if your heart attitude is wrong. Just like you can be miserable in Norway, in the States, in the Philippines, and in these different places that you and I have traveled, we see people that are unhappy everywhere. And that's really more reflective of the heart attitude that we have. So I just want to say, like, man, I appreciate the mindset that you have too of life is good because I'm here, I'm with my family, I'm doing what God's calling me to, and I get to have the beauty around me, and I get to see and experience that. and it's an adventure. It's an honor and it's a privilege to say yes to the call of God and to let my kids experience that too, and not push them aside and go, well, you guys are weights on my ankles as I'm trying to swim towards the finish line. It's like, no, they are. We get to do this together as a family, as a team, as a unit. So I want to say I really appreciate that, and say thank you for sharing that and for all the things you've shared. One last thing, I've got about 4.5 minutes, it looks like, left on our recording today too. One thing that I would like to ask you about as we're doing this is, so let me go here. So let's say that you take yourself from from 10 years ago. So Brad, now 38, I think you said, sits down with Brad, who's 28, and says, all right, so what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self, or people that are launching into things or feeling stuck in things, or that you would give yourself now, looking back on the faithfulness of God, some challenges, and moving forward? What exactly would you say to yourself?
Yeah, I'm so glad we're ending on this question. Here's something I really feel like someone in your audience needs to hear. And this was just a profound revelation for me. And it was during a time in my life where it was extremely difficult. We were in that season where everything had blown up. We're trying to rebuild ministry. Financially, we were having a lot of problems. I remember taking a drive home from church. My wife is in the car. My kids are in the car. I said this statement: I just can't take much more. There's always more month left than there is money. It just, things weren't looking good. And the next morning, I remember waking up still feeling kind of bad about everything. I actually, on my way to work, I backed up into our garage door. I bent up our garage door.
Oh no.
Didn't really have the money to replace it at the time, but had to anyway, find a way, because we were renting at that point. About a week or two later, lost my job as well. My wife at that time was maybe 6 months pregnant with our first kid. I was 30 years old. I felt like a loser. Like, I literally felt just like nothing was going right in my life. And during that time, I was on a walk, and just on the inside, I heard, you know what, son? My grace doesn't make it easy. It makes it possible. And so in that moment, I knew that if I did not give up, I could do what God called me to do. I could make it. We joked around earlier about the quote or phrase from Pastor Kenneth W. Hagin: I cannot be defeated and I will not quit. I had that armband here to remind myself, no matter how hard it gets, God's grace will make it possible. And you know what? God is faithful. I'm still here on the mission field, still going strong. We have momentum like never before. I'm fired up about the mission like never before, and God's grace is what's made it possible. So if you're sitting there right now, you're at the lowest of lows of lows, it doesn't look the way you thought it would, and you're trying to get into that next season, but God has you at this point right now, just stop for a minute, breathe, and just say, God, I'm surrendering to you. I'm surrendering to your grace. That's what's going to make this possible. And I'm going to get everything from this season that I need in order to move forward into the next thing that you have for me.
Wow.
So that's what I would say to you.
Clear, concise, and that's an amazing thing. Thank you so much for that. That's even a blessing to everyone that's listening, a blessing to me as well, because I shared with you again, like in one of the times between recordings as well too. You guys are the picture of faithfulness, the picture of hard work and of dedication, and of that attitude of I cannot be defeated and I will not quit. Man, our time got away from us. We'll have to do this again sometime and have you share some more thoughts and ideas on things as you're available. I just want to say it's been an honor having you on the podcast once again. So thank you so much, Brad. I want to encourage all of the people that are listening. You guys need to get connected with Brad and Anna. I'm going to be including their email for their newsletter down in the link below. Also their Norden calls. If you have a heart for Europe, get connected with these guys, get connected with the Grunwalds, get connected with people, because that will help you immensely. And even if you're not going, support the work that God is doing. These guys have honor, they have integrity, and they're doing the work of ministry. So we're going to be including all their details on the video below. Follow them on social media, see what they're up to. And thank you all so much for listening. You guys be blessed and have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Brad. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. My pleasure.